Well, we're here today talking about adjuvants and different issues with adjuvants, and we're really fortunate to have a prominent person in our industry with us, Joe Gednalske. He's currently Director of Education and Adjuvant Development with CPDA and also does some other consulting work. So thanks for taking the time, Joe. We want to talk to you because of your decades of experience and some successes in the adjuvant industry. So, can you give me a little bit of your background for the group?
Okay, thanks, Bob. But yeah, and again, we're still trying to fight off winter here and get into summer. So I'm glad to take some time to help a little bit on adjuvants. As Bob mentioned, I'm currently doing some work for CPDA, which has been a lot of fun doing webinars for the last couple of years. Even though my title may be lengthy, basically my role for CPDA is to help in education on adjuvant value promotion. I think the biggest thing we see in this industry is so many people do not understand how important adjuvants are and how important they are to successfully produce a crop each year. So I spent the bulk of my career after graduating from SDSU. I spent a few years as a county extension agent that went back to South Dakota State to do my master's degree. Upon graduation there, was hired by Land O'Lakes Inc. and it was actually Land O'Lakes was the ag division at that time. And then of course we went through a lot of iterations of other names. I met Bob when I moved to Ember Grove Heights, Minnesota, when we put together a merger with Cenex at that time. So it became Cenex Land O'Lakes Agronomy Company, and AgriAlliance, then on to Winfield in 2007. And through the bulk of that, did education on agronomy. I'm actually a certified professional agronomist, and that's the way I really looked at developing adjuvants, was from an agronomic standpoint, how important they were. And meeting Mr. Hertzfeld when I started up in Ember Grove Heights, Minnesota in 1987, I learned about marketing and the importance of actually building something you can sell. And so Bob and I put together a lot of adjuvant systems, many of which still cover millions of acres today. So that's kind of a proud point for both of us, that we've got things that we developed together that are still actively being marketed and sold and applied to U.S. acres. So that's the fun part of this business. So get into the adjuvant business. It can be very rewarding and fun. So that's probably enough background, Bob.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Along with that, what are some of the projects you're working on right now?
Well, I'm doing because of, as we just talked earlier, the kind of the gap in people in the adjuvant business. We went through a lot of years where a lot of people did not move into this space. And so we got a 10 to 15 to 20 year gap of people that really got interested in helping develop adjuvants. And so I'm doing some consulting with several different companies that are, I've been able to fool that I do know a lot about adjuvants yet. So that's kind of fun, especially under a pandemic. Now, once we get out of this, maybe I won't be quite as interested in consulting, but it's been fun to help people work on new adjuvant systems. To try and, again, help U.S. growers do a better job of growing crops more successfully.
Yeah, and I've seen that you're doing a lot of educational programs and webinars, which I've been part of and listened to, and they're excellent. It's a good way to get to the people that don't understand it, that want to probably move into our industry. And one of the things that you and I always tried to purvey to our customers and agronomists was how to tell the customer the value of adjuvants. I think you told me this, Joe, is that the average farmer cannot see the difference between a 10 or 15% difference in weed control. You need to be a trained agronomist. So when they're spraying adjuvants, they really can't see it unless it's very special situations. So, and then of course, over the years, the adjuvant business kind of had the title of snake oil. That's probably been better now through a lot of more research and consistent products. But you also did put together some numbers for us about what the true value of adjuvants are. So can you explain a little of that?
Well, and that's always been the battle with adjuvants is how do you really show the value? Uh, and it's really because the herbicides that they're used with vary so much. Many herbicides request a tank mix adjuvant with them, but some are much more active or much more reactive to the adjuvant system that you put in there. And then you got the environmental issues as they're applied too. In hot, dry, or cold conditions, the value of the adjuvants are much, much greater. So in some ways, the adjuvants are probably thought of too much as an insurance policy for those bad years when you're spraying in difficult conditions. But I mean, on average, a herbicide that requires an adjuvant system, you're going to lose 10 to 50% of its activity if you don't have the correct adjuvant with them. And that difference in between there is really whether you're using a premium adjuvant that's got the right oil, the right surfactant system in there that'll get you optimized performance. And again, that goes back to those weather conditions. Can I get away with a cheap adjuvant this time, or do I need that premium one that's going to give me all the value? And that's always been the struggle, is to how do we relate that all the way down to the grower level that it's worth using the value-added adjuvant every time. Because over a 10-year period, you're going to win all the time if you're using that premium adjuvant in that spray tank. One of my best examples, and Bob remembers this well, when it was DuPont back then, came out with Accent herbicide. And Accent came out, and it was a godsend to U.S. growers because they could finally control post-emerge grass in corn. And its use rate was 2/3 of an ounce per acre. And I think they had either a non-ionic surfactant or a crop oil, the old 8317 crop oil with it. And it worked well at that 2/3 ounce acre. But at the same time, that's when the methylated oils came out. Dr. Nalawaya, all of his work, Jim Hazen created a methylated oil. And when they started using those methylated oils with Accent, the performance just topped out. It worked beautifully. And the growers immediately saw, I don't need 2/3 ounces of this. And they all went down within a couple of years. They were down using 1/3 of an ounce per acre. And had DuPont done the work on that, so now you have a value proposition there that the basic ended up caught in. He was pricing at 2/3 of an ounce of per acre, and that was the value of the herbicide, as they rightfully put. But now everybody was using it at 1/3 of an ounce per acre because the methylated oils worked so well with it. So they lost all that value because they didn't do the proper adjuvant work before that herbicide came out. And that's just a perfect example of the necessity of the manufacturers more carefully looking at the adjuvant systems that can truly add the value. Now, we don't have a lot of new herbicides coming out today like we did in the 90s, late 80s and the 90s. But still, as you look at chemistries today, and more importantly, new adjuvant technology that has no space on herbicide labels, even though they may be the best thing, as we used to say, since sliced bread. When you go back to when Bob and I were kids, and when grandma and mom had to make the bread, and then suddenly Wonder Bread showed up, and you know what? That was a heck of a lot easier for everybody. So that's where the term comes from, is good as sliced bread. So
the other thing that I found to be difficult, and I'm just doing some projects now where I'm trying to read through active ingredient labels
mhm.
to determine exactly what they are recommending for adjuvants. And some are very specific and good, you know what to do, but the far most majority of those AIs are somewhat unclear, if not totally unclear. They'll say in one section, do not use a NIS and don't use an oil and don't use this. Literally, don't use an adjuvant. And then on the bottom of that statement, it says, if adjuvants are to be used, use the CPDA certified adjuvant. So they're confusing. And how do we as an industry approach the basics to maybe give more specific direction on adjuvants?
Yeah, I think, and that's been a long-term problem, and a really a hindrance to innovation from adjuvant developers because of the vagueness of those labels. And frankly, in the last CPDA webinar, we talked briefly about that, the inconsistency, even on non-ionic surfactants. Most of them really don't know what they need. And how do we deal with that? And a lot of that almost has to be, Bob, right at that local level. If we've got a distributor that's got a good adjuvant, and most do, can they get that education down so they can sit down with that Corteva rep or that BASF rep and say, for this herbicide, I think you should be using this, and here's why. And I think that in the interim, that's about the only thing we can do to address some of those inconsistencies. In the long run, I do think we need to act while we can as CPDA to let's start an education process, not only for US retailers and growers, but can we as CPDA put together an education system to try and help the basic manufacturers and the generic herbicide manufacturers to understand better how adjuvants work and more actively, a lot of the labeling will never change, but you can put out special labels that could address some of these adjuvant issues that would really help the industry. And I think if that's something in the next few years CPDA can put together to put together an education system, and we're going to have an example of that coming up at the May AIC meeting. We've got a adjuvant university, and this is really a trial run at this to show what we think we could do, and then make a more sophisticated effort in education for the manufacturers, for ag retailers to try and show this value proposition that adjuvants have.
You know, we mentioned CPDA a number of times, and I'm sure we're going to have people that will be watching and listening to this. Maybe you should give a definition of what CPDA is and does.
Well, CPDA, Council of Producers of Agri-Technology, it's an advocacy group for inert suppliers, distribution, and generic herbicide, insecticide, fungicide manufacturers. So we represent them at the national level and at the state level on issues addressing adjuvants and inerts and generic herbicides. And then also a lot of what we do today is around education, trying to bring the value of inerts that are going into tank mix adjuvants to the US growers, what our real efforts are around. So go to cpda.com. A lot of these webinars are on that location that we've done, and give you an example. You can also look at the CPDA certified adjuvants on there. So I think that's a good site. But I think it's all around doing a better job of educating on tank mix adjuvants because we just have had a gap in doing that.
You talk about CPDA certification. Can you give us a little idea what that is?
So started in the late 90s, started working on it. I think we introduced it in early 2000s. And basically it is a self-certification program that essentially it's a truth in labeling is what it's really doing for you is we're verifying that they've done the toxicological work on the adjuvants that you're looking at that are listed on that. So you got to do your tox work because it's not required in the US. There's no rules in a knife fight. And adjuvant business in a lot of states is exactly that way. So the reason for the CPDA certification would be good for those manufacturers that are interested to get their product certified. So what it says on the label is what's actually in there. If it's got a surfactant in there, it's got the percent of true surfactant. So you can look and see what's in there. It's not proving performance in any way, but it is really my short definition is truth in labeling. I think in the adjuvant industry, that's extremely important that we have accurate labeling, and the things that are on there are recommended on hundreds and hundreds of herbicide, insecticide, and fungicide labels to use a CPDA certified adjuvant, and that's the reason for that.
Yeah, it took quite a few years for that to get
Yeah.
its feet on the ground, but I think you really have it now with CPDA. It's got a pretty good system
Yeah.
of certification.
Correct.
Going back to labels again, read through all post-emergent and even some pre-emergent labels. They have lengthy sections on drift and minimizing drift and vaporization and setbacks. But they don't hardly ever see a recommendation for drift control. They just recommending controlling it. So I guess our situation back in the old days, Joe, is that our parent company looked at our risk management, and when the crop prices were real high, they said, we're putting a drift control in every tank, and that became our motto.
Yep.
So what should a user do when they see you got a controlled drift and they know there's drift control, but how do you correlate that between the label and what you do?
Yeah. Well, again, part of that goes to a total lack of understanding of what drift and deposition agents do. And again, it goes back to that education effort. And I've had the luxury because I've worked with a company that had wind tunnels for a lot of my career. So I got to look in depth at a lot of drift and deposition agents, both my own companies and frankly, most of the competition, because we looked at all of them. And every distributor in the US has a good drift and deposition agent. They all have things that work very, very well. The problem with labeling is they don't understand the whole rest of the story. And the state of Illinois recently published a nice little piece on 13 things to do to reduce drift. And again, Bob, they didn't mention a drift and deposition agent. And it's because of a lack of understanding of what they really do. And yet, my background, I've seen over 300 different nozzles tested with most of the different drift and deposition technologies with them. And even with the good drift control nozzles, you'll still end up reducing the actual fines another 50%. So even if you've got a great nozzle, a widely used ARXR nozzle, and let's say with glyphosate, for example, you still got 6 to 7% fines, which compared to a flat fan spray tip, that's a 60, 70% reduction in the amount of fines coming out of that spray trip. So control, declare yourself a winner and go home. Former boss of Bob and I used to say. But if you use a drift and deposition agent, you can knock that down another 50%. So what's the value of again, continuing to reduce the amount of fines? It's only beneficial. It's basically, so you're picking up another 5% more active on the weed you're trying to kill. And in tough conditions, that's priceless to you. So that's the thing we're overlooking is we can do better by using a drift and deposition agent. And that's why I've advocated that for years, because I've seen so many instances, even with really good drift control nozzles, the drift and deposition agents are still giving you your value far above what they're costing.
I think part of the problem there too, Joe, is maybe not so much now, but the equipment company manufacturers, the nozzle people, the equipment came up with all these ideas to reduce drift, and they weren't going to promote an adjuvant because they were the end all.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of
absolutely. And again, they are helping, but like I say, it's the value even in a good drift and deposition nozzle or a good drift nozzle. The value of that tank mix drift product is still far more than the cost. It almost double it, even with a good nozzle, it's still going to double your value. So if you're spending $1.50 on it, you're easily making $3 on it. So that's a good proposition. Any of us would take that in Vegas any day of the week.
Absolutely.
Getting $1.50 and getting $3, you'll do it every time.
Well, Joe, I don't have any other questions unless you have anything else you want to tell us or purvey.
No, I think that should do it. Like I say, I think if you really look in, I'd really encourage, all the way down to the retail level. We just got to continue to educate, and try and show the value of tank mix adjuvants, because they're a sure bet to using the best product you can get your hands on is always going to make you money. And that's what this is about. We still got to make money, even at near $8 corn, near $15 soybeans. Boy, but now with expensive herbicides, the adjuvant's value is extraordinarily more valuable today than it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And one of the challenges we have in our organization, I'm sure with the other similar organizations, is getting that message to that retailer, because you got more layers of people within that distribution system, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, and then to the grower. So that's going to be our challenge. And that's why you're working on it, starting at the CPDA. So I think we come to the end of our time, Joe. I really appreciate you coming and telling us some of your background and purveying some of your expertise that you've shown in the industry over all these decades. So I thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Rhea. I appreciate it. It was fun. Thanks.